So the first biomechanical principle that we're going to look at, and in my opinion the most important biomechanical principle, is force summation. Now, force summation is essential because it has a few elements in it that has a massive impact on athletic performance, such as timing and as many muscles as possible, and we'll get onto that in a moment. However, if you think about a successful cricketer, no matter how powerful and how strong they are, if they get the timing wrong, they're in trouble. Likewise, if you look at someone tackling and they get the sequence wrong, where they perhaps flex at their hips too early and haven't generated enough force from their powerful leg muscles, then that tackle is going to be ineffective. And reasons why force summation are also really important. If you think about projectile motion, which we will be coming on to, one of the key aspects of projectile motion is speed of release. Now, that is determined by how far away you are from perhaps the target. So if you are a netballer and going for a shot, your speed of release will be very different, and the force summation therefore generated will be different when you're close to the hoop compared to further away. And all of this combines to make a movement look smooth. And those athletes who are new and novices in the sport often will get key aspects of force summation wrong. That's why it's incredibly important to learn correctly those correct sequences from a young age, because it will have a massive impact on athletes as they grow. Therefore, that is why I think force summation is A, one of the most important, and B, will be very easy for you to help with your analytical work for 1.2. So, as already mentioned, force summation has a number of components, and we'll go over those in a moment. However, we better look at a definition. And a really basic definition of force summation is the combination of forces produced by different parts of the body. And furthermore, it is to achieve maximal velocity or force by transfer of momentum through successive body part movement. And I'll come to that successive body part movement in a moment, but a few key words that we need to look at there. And the first one is velocity. Now, velocity is just a simple way of saying speed. The only difference is, if any of you are doing physics in your science studies, velocity is a vector, and that requires not only a time factor but also a direction. We'll get to that later. Now, momentum is the product of mass and velocity. And it is the strength or force that a body can have when it is moving. And we will look at transfer of momentum later and the different types of momentum, but for now we're just concentrating on force summation. Now, in the next slide you'll see Valerie Adams, and as you know, she is a well-known, internationally recognised shot putter. So I've used her as a good example, and when you're looking at this video of Val and the power that she creates in her shot put and how successful she is, I want you to think about all the things that you see her doing. What is she doing in her preparation? What is she doing in her execution? And what does she do in her follow through? It is a very short video for you to watch. Okay, so there are a couple of aspects that you need to consider when we're looking at force summation, about 4 or 5, because when we're looking at force summation, we want as many body parts to act simultaneously for something that's called the kinetic link theory, which is basically just transferring the momentum and the force and energy you create from one muscle to the next, to the next, to the next. And we do that by these things. We use as many segments of the body as possible, be that your legs, trunk, arms. We then have to do it in the right sequence. No point in doing it out of sequence, and that's where we link back to learning skills in the right manner. And we use our biggest, largest muscles first, and then followed by our smallest muscles. Now, the reason why this is those big muscles generally around our center of gravity, which depending on your balance will be somewhere around your hips. Those big quads, hamstrings, gluteus maximus, your abdominal muscles, they can generate a lot of power quite quickly, and then we transfer it to the smaller muscles that provide that finer detail, such as the flick of the wrist in basketball. And then we've got to use the right timing, as I've already said. Again, that links very closely to sequencing, and we've got to use it also through our greatest range of motion. Now you can see the wee volleyballer here, they've only got a little bit of knee flexion going on that image, but they are engaging their quads, hammies, glutes, abs. Now on the next image you'll see a lacrosse player, and I want you to think specifically about flexibility and range of motion.
Rabel conserves this momentum through his hips and torso, rotating his shoulders over 1,300 degrees per second, faster than NHL All-Star Alex Ovechkin.
Now, if we want to start showing some higher level thinking, we need to link back to what we did and what we learned in anatomy. And you'll remember that the definition of a joint is where two or more bones meet. Now, the flexibility of a joint, or the range of motion offered a joint, is often dependent on how the joint is structured, be that the number of bones, the number of ligaments and tendon attachments. So also what you should be able to remember is that the ball and socket joint has the largest range of motion, and there are two ball and socket joints. We've got this one here of his hip, excuse my awful drawing, and here of the shoulder. Now, actions that can occur at these ball and socket joints are abduction, adduction, rotation, circumduction, internal rotation, but here on the right leg we can see hip flexion and extension about to occur. Now I'm going to ignore the left arm because and the left shoulder, just because that is out for balance and stability during a dynamic movement such as this. But as you're about to see with this image here of David Beckham, he has got a huge amount, a huge angle here for his range of motion at his hip. Now that's generating a lot of force. Okay, we've also got his quads, this is his gluteus, his quads are engaged, his latimus dorsi, which is underneath here, will be engaged, also down here to allow the shoulder abduction occurring. We've got his hamstrings here. You've also got his gluteus maximus, and not his gluteus maximus, his gastrocnemius here to allow for this plantar flexion and about to be dorsiflexion at the ankle joint. That's a lot of muscles being used. That's a lot of power being generated. And we've also got transfer of momentum, because this would have been done from a run-up. Now, these are just all higher level thinking things that I need you to consider when you start analysing your own videos and own actions. The sequencing and timing is also really important, and as you can see from our little fellow here on the right, he's not using a big range of motion there, which we've already mentioned, but what you can also see is that he looks a little bit clunky, and that is quite often the characteristic of a novice learner, someone who's learning the skill for the first time and is in the stage of learning which we call the cognitive stage. We'll get to that in a whole nother unit of work, but what you often see from our beginning athletes is that they use a lot of energy doing things incorrectly because their sequencing is incorrect, and they don't engage the big muscles first. They may throw the tennis ball too high and start with their swing of the racket too early and miss it completely. Another good sport to see this is in beginning, not just tennis players, but actually all racket sports. I particularly like watching beginning cricketers because they look really uncoordinated. And when you watch Roger Federer in the clip next, which is a 15-second clip, you'll notice how smooth and fluid he looks, and he doesn't look like he's using a lot of energy. Now that is a great characteristic of a autonomous learner, someone who knows the skill exceptionally well. and he has the timing, the sequencing right. He's using a big range of motion, particularly through that shoulder joint. He's engaging his quadriceps and his hamstrings and his gastrocnemius. He's also applying what we call ground reaction force to the ground, and that is something that we all look at when we investigate Newton's laws. But if you have a think about when you first started learning a skill, you probably lost your energy very quickly, you probably made lots of errors, you probably had lots of feedback because you were just doing things slightly out of time, and that all links to the fluency of the movement, but it also can negatively impact or positively impact how much force you can create.
Here we have a visual representation of this concept of force summation. On the far left, where it says too early, you can see that the movement's been passed from one body part to the next too quickly, and therefore maximum force production has not been achieved. On the far right, it's the opposite, where the movement's been passed from one body part to the next too late. Again, you can see there that maximum force production has not been achieved. Whereas in the middle, we've got a well-timed movement where the body has passed the movement onto its next body part in a ideal timing, and therefore maximum force is produced.
Okay, so the last aspect we're going to look at is using as many muscles as possible. Now, we've already mentioned timing and sequencing, and you generally start with your big, strong muscles around your center of gravity. Now, depending on what action you're doing will depend on what muscles those are, but they tend to be your abdominals, your quadriceps, hamstrings, gluteus maximus, and depending what else, perhaps your latissimus dorsi. Now, you've got to engage these big muscles because they are big, they are powerful, they have lots of muscle fibers, and all together when you work with the same sequencing and timing and through that full range of motion, you get a lot of power. And when you look at the next video, which has a 3-point shot, or even Stephen Adams here to get the height that he required for his slam dunk, that you can see he needed to use his big muscles first. That muscle energy and force is then created and transferred up into the smaller limbs, and you can't see it in this shot here, but right at the last minute there'll be a finger roll that allows him to do that final touch of power and transfer the energy he's created into the basketball.
We were only going to blow you up if they didn't turn you over. And how on earth were they going to turn us over when you only gave them a count of 5? We didn't have time to work out.
So in every single one of these sporting actions you can see on this page, force summation is being created. Now, force summation is the biomechanical principle of how you gain power or use power. And power is a combination of your strength and your speed. So there are very little sports that I can think of that require no strength or speed or power. So what I'd like you to do is either use one of these images and think, how is force summation being applied? Or if you're not keen on any of these, pick a sport of your own choosing and just jot down some ideas, because we'll be using that in class when we are next together in our group space.